That CPD show. My name is Chris and I'll be your host for today. And today I'm joined by Esther Storey. Esther has co-led CLM Church in Coventry for just over 11 years, functioning as co-senior pastor with her husband, Martin. And they seek to build a strong city centre church that is characterised by passion for the presence of God, courageous faith, and partnership with others in the city and beyond to bring God's kingdom. Esther is also the chair of HOPE Coventry and is the national prayer lead for Assemblies of God GB. Martin and Esther married in 1997 and have 3 children. Esther, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Chris. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. And before we get started, I'd love to hear about what you're doing with the prayer in AOG. So do you want to just give us a just an insight into what you're doing, what you're seeking to do, and a little bit about the kind of the prayer role that you've got.
Yeah, I think we're really honoured to be invited to be prayer leads for AOG. I guess that really flows out of it just being a massively important value for us at CLM, and very much part of our journey of the last 11 years has been not only just, I guess, praying first, but really seeing a house that's built on prayer. We've seen our breakthroughs come through prayer. We do quite a bit of prayer and fasting. And just like if people manage to build church without a serious amount of prayer, they are way, way more gifted than we are, because I just don't know how you do that. So really, we're just trying to bring a little bit of that into AOG, help others, I guess, be encouraged in pursuing prayer, building really a core of prayer in the heart of churches, a passion for the presence of God and a pursuit of that, which kind of interlinks with prayer and with worship, mainly because that's where people can encounter the manifest presence of God. That's where the gifts of the Spirit get stirred up and overflow, and that's where prayers get answered and breakthrough comes. And essentially, if we want to see revival, which I'm sure we all do want to see our nation revived, it's likely to come in answer to prayer. So really, we're just trying to bring that spirit, stir that. It's great to be in at the heart of the NLT and beginning to talk about how we can increase prayerfulness and how we can just bring a lead in certain settings, just to bring what we carry, and that's a particular heartbeat of ours. So really, that's what we're on with. There's lots of things that are potentials, but it's really the value and the culture, and helping people access prayer, perhaps not maybe just as such a discipline or a thing that we know we should do. I think everybody has that, but having prayer with the presence of God at the heart, so it becomes actually something very life-giving and enjoyable, and something that really grows us as we're doing it. So that's what we're trying to bring.
Brilliant. And I definitely sense your heart and your passion in that, which is absolutely fantastic. Well, we've got 3 resources that you've brought with you today, and I'm really excited to dive into those. But before we dive into that, it would not be Desert Island Development if we didn't talk about dessert. So I think it's very important that we talk about your favorite dessert. If you were to, this isn't a desert island. I keep saying this is a dessert island, which I think is a much better island, if I have to say. What's your favorite dessert for this desert island?
I mean, I've got to say it's a very difficult question, because I like to take a very inclusive approach to desserts. But if I had to pick one, then I would say it's a blackberry and apple crumble with custard, but made with blackberries that I have picked myself. And mainly that's because that means they've been free. And blackberrying is something maybe your listeners have never blackberried. It's a slightly crazy thing, because you do kind of end up getting in brambles and getting scratched, but it's something that I have done through my life with my children when they were little, with people that I love and know well and can entice to come blackberrying. So there's normally like a story and an experience, and then if you take them home and you make blackberry and apple crumble, it's just like a very meaningful experience. It's not just a great dessert.
Yes, and well, apple crumble has been one of the favorites that's
I've seen it more than one mention.
Yes, absolutely. So I think talking about why the blackberry, what that brings to the apple to bring the end product. Obviously, custard is obviously another big thing as well. So there's 3 big elements here. Well, four big
Some big
elements. You've got
elements.
blackberry, apple, the crumble topping, of course, the custard. Why blackberry with the apple? What is it about the blackberry that you love so much?
I think, I'm not sure I was prepared for that particular question, Chris, but I think it's just the way it kind of counterbalances the apple. It can be a little bit sharp, but a little bit kind of, I don't know, I want to say woody, but that's not quite the right thing. I'm clearly not a wine connoisseur, and I've not got these tastes worked out. But the taste, the flavors fit really well. It kind of gives a depth to the flavor of the fruit, and the fact that at the end of August you can go and find them growing and they're free. That just adds value, really.
Yes, and so do you have a blackberry? Is it a blackberry? Is it a bush? Is it, or is it not on a tree?
Yeah,
it's
not
a
something
bush.
you really grow or cultivate. So blackberries tend to grow wildly near rivers, near water. So and where places are overgrown. So you get loads of like blackberries and brambles, they're sometimes called. So you just like you head out, or sometimes I go out because I often go out for walks anyway. So you see the blackberries and you think, oh, I need to come back with a pot. So then you go back with your pot. Look a bit crazy, but the other people there will know what's happening. So that's all right. And then you gather up the blackberries. And in my case, if you can entice somebody to go with you, of course, anyone you're enticing to do that is somebody that you've really got quite a good friendship with. So then it's just a fun experience. And you come home with a full pot of blackberries. So it's great.
Yeah, very good. It actually reminds me of kind of it brings back sort of childhood memories, because I used to also have blackberry and apple crumble, which I'm pretty sure my mum would go and find somewhere and find some blackberries in a bramble somewhere. So it definitely brings back some good memories. So I think it's an excellent addition to this desert island. So thank you so much for that. That is excellent. Shall we move on to talk about resources? Let's talk about your first resource. What's the first one that you got?
Yeah, the first resource that I would want to talk about is the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, which is a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, I tend to listen to a podcast from there once a week, and Carey Nieuwhof tends to have a bit of a kind of a wide selection of people that he interviews from across kind of church leaders, business leaders, third sector. So, and it can be anything around leadership. So it's quite broad, and it just helps me. There's a few reasons why I find it helpful. First up, it's like I tend to do this. I have a Friday off. That's part of my weekend. I'm sure everyone listening, if you're in church leadership, you finish work, but your head's still in work. So part of a Friday, I'm trying to, do a food shop, the stuff you normally do. But actually, if I can listen to one of these while I'm doing it, it actually helps the work stuff that's still rumbling from the previous week to just be replaced by something else. So it actually helps me to switch off, but also helps me in my personal development at the same time. And the fact that it's a podcast and I can do it while I'm doing shopping also is helpful, although it does mean I end up having a few things like notes that I take next to shopping lists. So sometimes I have to go back to find old shopping lists to find the notes, which isn't terribly professional. But this is just how I make this work in my life. But the thing about it is it just gives so much breadth to a world that, like, I don't follow loads of business leaders. I don't have loads of time that I invest in professional development. So the fact that he has some people who are leaders in their field, just brilliant leaders, some of them very different to myself, it just means there's a breadth of what they cover in the conversation and what they get to, which just broadens me beyond. Like, if I was just choosing to read things or engage with things, I probably wouldn't naturally reach that breadth. And so just tuning in to that gives me a breadth of what I'm hearing and what I'm learning from. The other thing that's brilliant, of course, with a podcast like that, often the people that go on, they've just written a book or they're just releasing something. And the thing that I found, because sometimes I listen to him, I think, oh, I must buy that book, because obviously that's the way the world works. And then there's a few times I have bought some books, and then you read the book and you think, oh, actually, I probably heard the gold of this book on the podcast, which then means actually I don't need to buy every book. Maybe you already know that. Probably your listeners already know that. But what it just means is I know I'm even if I haven't got time to read all the books, because we haven't got time to read all the books, but you can get the gold of actually principles and ideas and things. Like if someone's written a book, they've thought about this probably for years, maybe researched this, just invested more time in refining the idea, and I can download it in 30 minutes while I'm in the fruit aisle. You know, it's just like, that's just how brilliant to be able to do personal development like that.
Yes,
So yeah.
I would definitely agree with that. Personal development whilst you're doing the shopping is actually something that I do myself. When on the rare occasion that I do the weekly shop in the Bright household, I also will put on a podcast or something that's interesting, that's developmental to me, because it's one of those things where it doesn't take too much thinking. I'd probably come back with random stuff that I didn't mean to pick up because I haven't been paying attention quite enough. But it's definitely those. I think that's what's the great thing, and part of doing CPD and bringing CPD about, which is what this podcast is really all about, and helping people to engage with that, is that development doesn't just have to be books. It can be,
Absolutely.
and podcasts are an excellent way, and you can log. We've got a way that you can log podcasts on the CPD site. And actually, there's so much gold in podcasts. Like you said, you can get the essence of a book, and you don't necessarily have to read the book, but there might be something you go, I'm going to dive into that. And I really think there's more to get from there. I'm wondering, with the Kerry Newhoff Leadership podcast, are there any episodes that stand out, or anything that you think, oh yeah, I remember this was something that's been really helpful for me?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I could tell you which episode it was. I think, and he has some people on more than once. I may have heard them more than once. One that completely undid me, which is inconvenient in Tesco, was hearing Patrick Lencioni give his own story of being undone by the parable of the sower, and having like a moment of just like grappling. So you've got this brilliant business leader, basically then also talking about Jesus really encountering him. That was very memorable. There was one with a guy called I think his name is Michael Bungay Stanier, very strange name, but he's one of the world's leading coaches, and he's written a book called The Coaching Habit, which I think has a subtitle of Ask More, Talk Less, Coach Better, or something like that. And he literally has, I think, 7 questions. It's like, these are your 7 coaching questions. So just hearing him talk, he's very different to how I would approach things, but just absolutely excellent. And I did buy that book, and that has been a brilliant resource for me, just in managing, actually, because the quality of your answer you get from someone is always determined by the quality of the question. And actually having somebody say, these are 7 really helpful questions that you can ask, has really helped me refine sometimes what I'm going after in a conversation and what I'm likely to get. So that's been very helpful. Just coaching, leading, managing, overseeing people, it's such a big part of work. Actually, any tools that can help are very useful. There was also one other episode, a writer, again, completely different again. Alison Farron wrote a book called The Power of Writing It Down, and she'd done some research and then written a book about, I think she'd done some research around study that had looked at people's mental health who journaled regularly. And I know some people on the podcast have said like journaling is part of their CPD, but also from a well-being perspective. And there was some just like really, really powerful statistics about something. I mean, I think there was something like, and I may not be able to remember it completely, but there was a study done where a cohort did some writing for 20 minutes or more 3 times in a week, and their mental health benefits were still statistically significant in a survey 6 months later compared to a control group, when they were doing journaling about things like writing about what had happened to them and how they felt about it. So, I mean, and she unpacks all of that and then talks about how you can develop your personal writing and journaling, not just if you want to write a book, but how to use that as a tool. Fascinating, very difficult. I'm not going to stumble upon that anywhere else. But that's what was being discussed that week, which was just very, very different and very developmental, and also gave me some tools that I still use and actually it helps pastorally some other people as well to use that tool.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea to have a kind of something that has a lot of breadth to it, so that you can provide new areas, because otherwise you can get stuck into your lane, the things that you really enjoy, which of course is,
Absolutely.
there's nothing wrong with that, but the lane that everyone has, everyone's got their lane, but to be forced to think outside of that, it broadens your thoughts, broadens your mind, and just have a podcast that can get you thinking in different ways. I think there's something very, very valuable about that. And then, like you said, journaling is been something that's been one of the sort of themes that started to come up with the podcast that on here. And I think there's something that's very, very valuable in that. And so that's great to hear. So that's the Carey Nieuwhof.
Yeah, just one other thing
podcast.
on that is not everybody on that is a Christian. A lot of people are. So obviously, North America, there's a lot more kind of particularly third sector Christianity, nominal Christianity, but they're not all Christians. And so then that's also just interesting space. And also listening to how Carey Nieuwhof, as someone who is a person of faith and doing this probably as an outworking of their faith, navigates those spaces. I even learned from that, which is just very helpful space to be in.
Absolutely. Even just the questions that Carey asks, I think, are always very good questions, and learning how to ask the right questions that get the right things out, which is obviously no pressure for me doing this podcast right now.
Not at all.
Brilliant. Well, that's the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast. We move on to your second resource. What's the second one?
My second resource is a book by Ruth Haley Barton, and she's written several great books, so someone else might mention some of the others. But this particular book is Invitation to Silence and Solitude, and that has a subtitle of Encountering the Transforming Presence of God. And this is a book I've just discovered fairly recently, just in the last couple of years, but we had a sabbatical probably 18 months ago or so, and I knew of the book, I knew of the author because I've read some of her other work, which is just brilliant. And but Ruth Haley Barton leads something called the Transforming Center in the US, which is there for Christian leaders and pastors, and it's for their own spiritual formation and well-being. So she's someone who's journeying in this setting. This is her niche, really. And I knew of the book. I thought I'm going to pick that up when I go on sabbatical and when I've got a bit of time to retreat and just get into that and see how that is. And it's brilliant. It's based, as a number of things we probably come across on well-being are in the life of Elijah. So it's very biblically based. And she's fairly vulnerable about her own journey and her own story and exploration of silence and solitude, from a place of just not really being able to do that to finding that to be a very life-giving, very necessary space for her own spiritual formation and well-being. So you get a bit of her story rooted in scripture, but she makes it really, really practical. So kind of you read a chapter and then she gives you something to do and a way to manage that space and yourself in that space. And then she also kind of, there's a little bit at the back, it's like how to spend a day in silence and solitude. So for me, probably the reason that I would say this has to make the list is because since that sabbatical and having read the book, I have kind of got a practice of trying to go for a day's retreat with some regularity. It's probably like 3 or 4 times a year, but which is around my well-being, my connection with God, just pull away from all the other stuff and all the other demands to actually work out if I'm okay still and what God might be saying. And the brilliant thing about this book is it helps me to navigate that space, because sometimes when you're in the thrust of everything being very busy, the idea of a day of silence and solitude at one level is a bit terrifying. Because like, what will I do? And even now, even though I know it's always been a very life-giving thing to do, I can still feel a bit uncomfortable at the, I'm going to spend a whole day in silence and solitude. What will that be? So because I've got this book and she navigates me through it, basically it helps to give me a framework where I can step away, take a day and engage deeply with Jesus in a way that is powerfully informative to what's going on the inside of me, helps me to connect with God in the middle of that then is a very also forward facing and life transforming process. So those are very big words. It sounds quite grand. Basically, she's just given me a lifeline and a way to connect to God and to connect to the realities in myself, because in pastoral ministry, as I'm sure many people listening will know, it's easy to get a bit lost yourself. It's easy to not even pay attention to what's going on the inside of you. How are the things you're engaging with impacting you? How are they impacting your faith? Some of the way that people might be responding in your setting to certain things. How is that impacting me? And what's that informing, or how's that informing my self-worth, my view of myself in Christ? And it's only really when I go away in silence and solitude with the right questions that Ruth Haley Barton gives me, and making that space, that it helps me to kind of peel away the layers in an ordered manner that helps me to make sense of some of that without taking a week and without spending a lot of money on therapy.
Right. I mean, I'd love to
I've said a lot there.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'd love to dive into the practicalities of it, because when I think about a day in silence and solitude, I think probably like you, it sounds a bit daunting. And I think, have I got to go out into nature, or have I got to, how does that, I couldn't even imagine how that would look practically. So give me some insights of sort of the practical, putting that into practice.
So on a practical sense, I normally go somewhere where there's no one else who's got any expectations of me. So I could do this at home if no one else was at home, although there's always jobs and things at home. That's not the most constructive place. So if I've got anywhere to go away to, I'll go away for the day. And where I normally do this, there's a place in Coventry called the Breathing Space, which is somewhere that someone set up as a kind of like as a retreat center, but you can just book in and go for a day. So I just turn up at their house. I've probably got a room to myself. It's just like it's like a lounge. And but they've got some garden, they've got some other rooms, depending if anyone else has booked any of the spaces. So that's like really practically, I've got a space to go to. I may go outdoors if the weather's nice, but I'll go somewhere where it's not reliant on that, because obviously I'm still in the UK and that's not always very helpful. And then really what she does is she takes you through some processes. So invites you to start with to just breathe, take notice, like, do you feel exhausted physically? Are you even going to be able to engage? And it's just wonderful. She's like, if you feel really, really tired, just do something to rest before you try and do anything else. So like often I end up showing up somewhere and then just lying down for a bit, having some more rest, or doing something physically very restful. And like she encourages you to do that for as long as you need to, until actually you're ready to engage with God, which is just so different to every other week and every other day. So that's kind of just even helpful. But then she takes you through a process of attending to like, what do I notice that's true about myself now? And she encourages you to consider that physically to start with. And so you consider your physical well-being, how your body is, if you're carrying tension, if you're attending to the things you need to. And actually, that's just really helpful to sit and take stock. It's actually, am I looking after myself properly? Am I eating properly? Have I done any exercise? Have all those kinds of things, not with somebody else, like checking in, like accountability, but just let me stop and reflect. How am I doing on that? And you spend a bit of time, and I journal a few things. And that's kind of your headline. And then she moves to the mind and asks a question. It's like, what has my mind been concerned with lately? And so you just kind of identify, well, what are the things that are going around all the time? I may not even have realized, because they probably relate to some things that are going on in my world or family. But you just kind of stop and say, actually, these are some of the questions. And then encourages you to say, okay, and what's your mind doing with those? So what they're saying is, what are the thought processes? What's your mind doing with that? Are you generally feeling anxious about it? Are you generally feeling undermined because of it? And just actually stopping and taking stock of what impact the things that are going on around me are having on me. And the last time I went and did this was probably in July literally, as I sat down, there were 12 different things that were recurring concerns in my mind that hadn't, some of them I was probably very conscious of, some of them I wasn't really conscious of at all until I slowed down and stopped. And then she encourages you to really just to bring those and to sit before the Lord with them, not necessarily to ask him for an answer, but just to know that you can come with all the questions those things might be posing and the unfinishedness of some things, and to find the presence of God in all of that. And the thing that was amazing for me in July was, as I did that, the Lord spoke to me about every single one, not an answer, but helped me understand the situation and how it was impacting me differently in a way that I wasn't necessarily seeking for, but was very, very informative. And then she goes on and talks about your soul and losses and joys, which is just a very healthy way of stopping and saying, actually, some things have maybe hurt me in the last season more than I thought, and I do actually need to process that. So it's that sort of process, and because there's a structure to it, that kind of takes all day. That sounds like it shouldn't need to. I've just talked you through it very quickly, but just giving you the space and the structure and the way to do that in a way that's biblically based, I've just found very, very life-giving. And what I tend to find is things come out of that day that almost just like reset my trajectory a little as I come out of it, more towards truth, more towards walking closely with Jesus, and more towards what is joy-filled and life-giving. And that's very helpful.
Fantastic. I mean, it sounds absolutely fantastic. And I think having a structure, to me, sounds a lot more achievable, I think. And
yeah, it's just scary if you're going to do it on your own. You're like, well, what am I even going to think about? And am I going to go crazy? And is it going to be unhelpful? Because most of us, we need someone to help us with what's going on the inside of our heads and not just leave us alone with it. And that's why I just say I'd put it on this list, not because necessarily the best read, but it's opened a door to some very precious practices, I think is what I'd say.
Fantastic. Well, that's Invitation to Silence and Solitude by Ruth Haley Barton. Should we go on to your final resource?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Final resource is a book called Empowering Leadership by Michael Fletcher. And he says on there, how a leadership development culture builds better leaders faster. And so that's the essence of the book. I came across Michael Fletcher was the senior pastor of Manor Church near Fort Bragg in the US for many years, a church that I think under his leadership grew from about 350 to about 9,000. I think when I last engaged with him, I think they had expressions in something like almost 100 other countries around the UK, around the globe. And because they were close to Fort Bragg, which is a US military base, they were constantly having people in their church sent out around the world. And so they had this massive turnover in their church. So growing leaders, they just had to approach differently and quickly. And they were extremely missionally minded. So they're into church planting, into growing leaders. I think they have now got a goal to have a church planted everywhere in the world where there's a US military base, which is fairly impressive.
Yeah.
But so we came across Michael Fletcher as part of a learning community, and he was giving away his book for free. I don't always like things that are free, but sometimes they're really good. But the book, sometimes that book is brilliant because of the time and the season when you get it. And you read the thing that you need in the season that you need it. And that's probably why this book would be on my list, because we were at a learning community that was talking about leadership development and had helped us to identify that we had a leadership development culture within our church. There was a desire for that. The language made room for that. But we didn't have a leadership development structure. We didn't have anything that was like a pipeline or a pathway. And we knew we needed to grow leaders, and we needed to grow leaders fast, and we knew we wanted them to be good, but we didn't really have a pathway. And the thing that's brilliant about Michael's book is it's just kind of, sometimes you want to pick up a book, it's like, will you please just tell me how to do it, and what do I do next from where I am now, where I have nothing in place. And his book really does that. So he kind of talks about the why you need to do that, why you need the pipeline, and helps to explain that. But then in the book also, they they have their pipeline and the simplicity of it laid out for you. So it's really like it's 3 steps. It's kind of, I can't remember what they call them, something, and then a next step and lead step. So from when somebody first joins the church, it's like a basic introduction and discipleship, and then a kind of deeper discipleship. But it's always from the very start pointing to leadership. But because he kind of just shares the whole thing with you, you get all the practicalities. It's like all the nuts and bolts are here. Not that I need to copy Manor Church's way of doing things, because there's some things that are different for us, but just the principles were so clear and so strategic that it's like I can see how this would work. This is going to make you build better leaders faster, better leaders for your church. It's like, because we've all got a culture that we're functioning within. So how do you grow leaders for that setting? And I think some of the things that he unpacks in that around, he uses a term actually, decoding your DNA, just really, really helpful idea. It's like we all have a DNA in our churches, a culture, and we may have 3 or 4 statements that state some of that. But then that's like your stated culture. Then there's a whole load of unstated culture that unless we're decoding for people, we're just expecting them to work it out. And the quicker they work it out, probably the better they'll grow and the quicker they'll come on. But we often leave people to do a load of decoding themselves because we haven't stated it. So a lot of their training is around decoding the DNA and then helping put language to it. It's like, well, we want to teach you in that and grow you in that. And so like this book came to us at a point where we did not have a leadership pipeline, but it helped me feel like we could have. And it helped me feel like, actually, if I invest some time in this, we can pull the team together and get some ideas and build a pipeline that is specifically built around CLM and its values, with the things that are going to make leaders what they need to be for this house. But it will be, it will accelerate growth because we're putting language to it, we're putting structure to it. People will be able to see what is next. So I would not have been able to put some stuff together without being given the instruction and led forward in the way that I was by Empowering Leadership. And we do have a leadership pipeline now. There's also then been a process for CLM of actually getting that out to people in a way that's helpful to engage with it. And we're still on with that. And we're still refining that. That's not like all just done and dusted. But I think to go from a nothing in place to a something practical in place. And we've just done a load of work on actually getting information for our leadership pathway out into booklets so that everyone who's serving and leading can be able to see what their next step is, how they would grow. And we're then working on a resource base to sit alongside that. But we were really helped with the shaping of that by simply how approachable this book was and how simple it made, or the simple steps. There's no replacement for the hard work of some things where you just have to sweat it out and get it over the line. But if someone tells you what you're doing, then you know, actually, if I do this and I can see the way you're telling me to do it, it is going to land at what we need. And so I'm not guessing. That's why this is on there in my list.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, leadership pipelines are something that are very close to my heart. I was able to work with my own church's leadership pipeline and help develop that, and I've done that with some other churches as well. So it's something that's really close to my heart, and I think the value of a leadership pipeline probably can't be understated. And I think most churches, the church that they really long for and see, a leadership pipeline normally is one of the best ways to help churches move towards that. Because in reality, a church that's growing and healthy is something is a place where leaders are empowered, and you can't empower leaders unless you develop them. And so having a pipeline where you're bringing through new leaders, where you're giving away large areas of church life, so that you can focus on what God's called you uniquely to work on. I think that's really important. How does that pipeline? What does that pipeline look like for you? Like getting some sort of on the practical side of it.
I think what we tried to put together was what we initially called an aligned leadership structure. So what we said is actually probably throughout our ministries, there's probably some stages that people can grow through those ministries. And if we can articulate those, what the stages are, what the responsibilities are, what we're asking of people, and then against those responsibilities and stages, we looked at how we were wanting people to grow in terms of their discipleship, in terms of their teamwork and leadership skills, and in terms of their godly character. And then at each level, there's also a competency level. But there's these three other areas that really across everything in church, your teamwork and leadership skills, your discipleship, your godly character, these things should be aligned. So actually, if you're in kids work or if you're on refreshments team, you're going to know that the stage that you're at, the expectations are similar. And in all our ministries, we're trying to grow leaders with similar characteristics. So you can grow as a leader through serving on refreshments. You can grow as a leader through serving on kids. There's nothing that's like a silo of like, oh, you just turn up and serve here. This is just about the chairs. It's never just about the chairs or just about the drinks. So then essentially, what the pipeline is it sits alongside the practical responsibilities and the practical things that are happening within church life, where actually you can step into a role or a serving team and you can start serving straight away. But then there'll also be a conversation about your discipleship and your growth and how you're growing and what your next steps for growth are. And that will depend on what you're in and what would be next. So I think that's the main premise. It's like it's very interwoven. It's through serving, it's through leading. We run some specific, it's interactive discipleship, but we call it serving and leading because it's training that sits alongside to facilitate the pipeline and covers the things we want people to grow in. We could maybe come up with a better name, but serving and leading is what it's called now. And so there's these different ways that you can access some input. A lot of it's actually based within the ministries. So getting our ministry leads and people at all stages to help those coming through after them to be drawn up is still a work we're on with. That's not, I wouldn't say we've completely nailed that. But that's kind of where that sits. And then we have some other things, other ways where you can serve, and particularly we have an internship program if people want to step into another level of development. So that sounds a bit woolly. It's a structure that kind of sits within all the practices and ministries.
Yeah. No, that's great. I think the main thing is that regardless of whether you're a large church or a small church, you can get started in developing leaders, and a simple framework and thinking about a framework can really help. And so I think probably the best thing is to say is that if you're listening to this as a minister and think, oh, how am I going to develop leaders? It's something like this book, Empowering Leadership, probably would be a really helpful tool just to get started and just to get you moving. Because, I think we sometimes want the perfect tool. And I think that actually just getting started, and you may think, oh, am I doing this right? But actually getting started and getting something that's going to just get you moving is going to be a really good thing. So yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, we started this work probably in 2017. Our church has grown by the grace of God unrecognizably since then, but we wouldn't have been able to keep growing. I mean, it's always a pressure to have enough leaders. But if we hadn't been on with this and hadn't grown some more leaders, we'd be in a bit of a mess now, because we just wouldn't have had people coming through, or wouldn't have had a way to really know, can we put that person into leadership or not, other than your gut feel. And there's a lot to be said for gut feel, but it's not great for people having confidence themselves in what you're putting them in. And that's actually the other side of this, is having a structure and having some things defined really helps when people come, as they often do. It's like, well, why have you put that person into that position but not me? And actually you can have really honest conversations that are about something that's set on paper. It's like, well, where do you see yourself in this? And almost always people aren't always self-aware, but often they are self-aware. And when you show them where that is, they're like, oh yes, I am. I'm here. I'm not there. And so actually I can see why that would be the case.
Yeah.
So it's really helpful, but actually pastorally as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So that's the book Empowering Leadership by Michael Fletcher. Esther, thank you so much for taking the time to bring 3 resources,
You're
3
welcome.
really excellent resources. Got the Kerry Newhoff Leadership Podcast, we've got Invitation to Silence and Solitude, and Empowering Leadership. And I think just really good things, things that you can, that give you breadth, that give you a really more sort of a heart and soul care, and then one that's really practical for leadership. And I think that's a really great help. So thank you so much. And I think, almost like the foraged blackberries, this is kind of we've foraged for some lovely resources there. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, no worries. And I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon on the podcast. Take care.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.